in addition to using personality as a measurable way to categorize human beings, they also used IQ tests all the time to as an accurate measure of a person's adequacy to be a father, be a mother, raise children, do a job. I mean, it was really disturbing that they could say someone is unfit to exist or reproduce based on an IQ test, which is oftentimes is just, a test to make people feel smarter or make people feel dumber. It's very, very archaic and stupid. They The third major flaw in their research was that they measured these results from completely unreliable sources, and then Harry Laughlin, who became basically the leader of the eugenics movement, skewed and exaggerated many of the results, just made them fit his hypotheses, how he thought it worked. Yet another incredibly dumb thing that they thought was actual fact, which we know now is not, is that a person's diet and customs and daily routines can affect the genes that they have. So that means if I was to become a vegetarian, which I would never do, but if I was to become a vegetarian, then that would have some effect on my genes that I would later then pass on to my children, them being vegetarians just because I made that life choice. Or saying because if I ran every day, that my children would become athletic simply because I made the habit of running every day. It's kind of like no brainer. What were these people thinking, Now that we've gone over the major flaws in their research and logic, let's look at what happened after all of these became publicized facts, after people started to go along with it. There were sterilization laws, marriage laws, and immigration laws put into place. Or immigration restraints, I should say. What happened is sterilization went down in the 20s, roughly. Officially and unofficially, people were sterilized. The first person sterilized was a girl named Carrie Buck. She was 17 years old, and because she was deemed unfit as a person to breed, she was sterilized. By the end of the sterilization stage in eugenics, 33 states had allowed the death of 60,000 American citizens. Harry Laughlin received awards for this. So the American government gave rewards to this man for killing people simply because he had a bunch of fancy words wrapped around a bunch of idealistic lies. So now looking at marriage, integrated marriages between races was basically taboo at that time anyway. It was a big no-no. So with the eugenics movement, mixing races became basically illegal. And there's more to this. Right around this time when all these laws were becoming heavily fortified against marriages, Calvin Coolidge, the vice president at the time, started to back the eugenics movement. Now, this is exactly what was needed to give the final shove for eugenics supporters to basically make it a completely allowable thing. Once they had the back of someone as important as a vice president, then it became acceptable, and people went along with it. It was all the backing that people needed to get these laws passed against marriage. There became a decline in marriages. A lot of people didn't start getting married because it was so impossible for them to marry, Basically, if you were deemed unfit by the eugenics movement, you could not get married. You could not reproduce, get married to have children. And of course, you wanted to get married because if you had children outside of marriage, it looked incredibly bad because this is the 20s and the 30s. People, or, it was a lot different time back then. Anyone of a different race couldn't get married. Basically, if you were Jewish, African American, certain people of European descent, certain definitely the Native Americans, a lot of these people could not get married simply because they were deemed unfit. In fact, anyone with 1/64th of a race could not get married. 1/64th. That's not even enough to get you qualified as part of that race. They couldn't get married. Simple as that. And I know what you're thinking. This sounds really familiar. Well, let's think back. Adolf Hitler, World War II, the Holocaust, very similar situation. In fact, a lot of it is the same science. Not quite as drastic in the U.S. as it was in World War II in Germany when Hitler had all the Jews put into internment camps and killed. But it makes you wonder if the United States had not become extremely part of this movement, if it had ever would have built up enough steam to reach Adolf Hitler across the seas, and whether or not World War II and the Holocaust would have happened in the same way. It really makes you think how history would be different. So now let's look at immigration. As far as immigration is concerned, Harry Laughlin and the ERO, they thought that immigration would mess up what America was and what they were trying to build, the perfect America, basically is what they were trying to do, and no one was let in, immigrant-wise, if you had any of the traits on this list of undesirable traits that they created, this list of traits that made you unfit to be an American, made you unfit to have children, all this very stupid things. The ERO stationed themselves in Ellis Island to crack down on immigration, because back then that is where all the immigration came in from. They came into Ellis Island, into New York, and that's where you get all these major cultural areas, cultural hearths in in New York, in Boston, in Washington D.C., that area, because it's where all the immigrants came into, and that's where they all settled and made their livings. But European immigration was cut down from 45% to 15% in their the ERO's time at Ellis Island. And there's more. Laughlin got more awards for successfully saving, what America was. Now, thankfully, through modern science and human rights movements and a little bit of common sense, we dispelled eugenics. It's no longer a valued science because it's flawed. Who gets to judge people? Who gets to say whether or not a person has the right to have children or live in a certain country? It's very disturbing to think about this. I mean, if you look at it, the United States we always think of it in that time especially as the greatest country on the earth, and people still think of it as that today. But when you look at it, we had an equally disturbing past as many of the countries that were there. This is a part of history that is not brought up very often, simply because it's very scary to think that the American government was backing this, to think that everyone as a whole, as a country, we were all kind of following these ideas. and so it's kind of hushed up in that manner. But I'm just hoping that you can see what from what I've shown you, from what I've told you, that you can get a better idea of this science and what they did, and a better idea of a little bit of history of the United States. Now, I would like to thank Stephen Maloff, an esteemed colleague of mine in high school, because I used his research paper on eugenics to help part of my research, as well as a website. The links will be found below the video. Um, but Stephen Maloff is a great guy, very intelligent. One day will become a supreme neurosurgeon, I'm sure. Um, and he wrote a fantastic paper on eugenics. I encourage you to check it out. We made many of the same points, actually, because those are the important points in eugenics. But check out his blog, because he also has a biology blog, and his is fantastic. He has some very interesting things. And I encourage you to check out the rest of my blog as well, because I have some interesting things. You can also find my blog through my WordPress account for chemistry, if you're interested in chemistry. And I guess a special thank you to Mr. Ludwig, because he let me put together a video instead of making me write a paper, because I do not like to write papers. So thank you, Mr. Ludwig, thank you, Stephen Maloff, and thank you for sitting through this video, and hopefully you learned something. Bye.